Picture a street so narrow that two people walking toward each other have to turn sideways just to pass. Now fill it with 50 women, each one carrying a basket of fish on her head, each basket weighing anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds, each woman moving at a pace that would embarrass most men on a brisk morning walk. Add the smell of 1,000 rotting fish at various stages of decomposition. Add the sound of those women shouting. And when I say shouting, I mean the kind of shouting that gets lodged in your skull and stays there 3 days later. Add the dark, the cold, the mud that is less mud, and more a liquid mixture of everything a pre-industrial city deposits in its streets, and somewhere in there the actual Thames, brown and enormous and alive with ships and eels and things you do not want to think about at this hour. That's Billingsgate. That's Tuesday morning in Tudor London. That's the world you're about to step into. This is 1572. Elizabeth I has been queen for 14 years, and England is in that strange bright moment between catastrophes. The terror of Mary's burnings behind it, the Armada still a decade and a half ahead. London is growing. London is always growing. By some estimates, 60, maybe 70,000 people are crammed into this city. By the time Elizabeth dies, it'll be 200,000. The city can barely hold what it has right now. And somewhere in the pre-dawn dark, on the north bank of the Thames, in a market that's been selling fish on this exact spot since before the Normans arrived, a woman named Marjorie Cole is already doing business. She's been awake since 3 a.m. She walked here in the dark, alone, with a knife in her boot and her best basket on her arm, because the good fish don't wait for the light. She's been doing this for 23 years, and tonight she's about to teach you everything. So, I make these history sleep stories, and I genuinely don't know whether you're listening because you love Tudor economic history, or because you just need something long and human and real to drown out the noise in your brain at 11:30 at night. Either way, here we are, Tudor Fishwives, the unacknowledged architects of London's food supply, women who owned nothing on paper and controlled everything in practice. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes are already open when the bells start. You don't need the bells. You haven't needed them for weeks. Something in your body now knows the hour before your mind does. Some animal clock that reset itself the moment you started this work, dragging you up through the dark like a hook through water. The room is cold. Not the polite cold of an autumn morning back in Norwich, where you could pull the blanket tighter and count to 10 before facing the day. This is Thames wind cold, the kind that comes in through the gaps in the plaster, settles on the wooden floor, and sits on your skin the moment the blanket leaves it. Your hands are already cracked. You notice this every morning now, because you notice everything now. That's what this work has done to you in 6 weeks, made you hyper-aware of your own body in a way you weren't before. The cracks run across your knuckles and down the sides of your fingers where the scales have gotten in. They don't bleed much anymore. They've toughened past the bleeding stage. But they ache. A deep, dull, constant ache that you've learned to work through because there is no choice, and because Marjorie's hands look like old river leather and she has never once mentioned it. You pull on your undershirt, then your linen bodice, then the grey wool dress that was already worn when you got it and is more worn now, the hem permanently dark with dock water and fish brine. Your apron goes over that, heavy canvas, stiff, smelling of yesterday's catch no matter how hard you scrubbed it last night. Then the coif over your hair, white linen that will be grey by midday. Then your boots, soft leather, resoled twice, fitting your feet now with the particular intimacy of shoes that have walked 10 miles a day for 6 weeks. The room you sleep in contains 3 other women. You share a pallet with one of them, Joan, who is 40 and has arms like a blacksmith and snores with a conviction that borders on aggressive. Joan is still sleeping. She worked a double shift yesterday, carrying fish all the way to Cheapside and back, and her feet are so swollen she had to cut the laces of her boots last night to get them off. You pull your boots on quietly. Try not to wake her. You fail because the floor creaks, and Joan opens one eye and says, "Market, market. Tell Marjorie she owes me 3 farthings for that mackerel. I'll tell her." Joan closes her eye. She's asleep again before you reach the door. The staircase is dark. Your hand finds the wall and follows it down, your feet feeling the familiar geography of the steps. The 3rd one wider than the rest. The 6th one that dips to the left. The bottom one that's not there. The gap that tricks you every morning no matter how many times you've done it. You step over the gap and into the hall, and the smell of the house wraps around you. Tallow candles and old food and damp wool, and under everything the Thames. Here, 4 streets from the river, the Thames is a presence rather than a scent. Something that lives in the walls and the timbers and the air itself. Something that has soaked into this building over the century it's been standing. Salt and silt and fish and commerce. The smell of money, if money smelled like something that had been dead for 3 days. You unlatch the front door and step into the street, and the smell hits you fresh. The Thames at low tide, full force. You've been here 6 weeks, and it still makes you take a step back. Not because you're not used to it. You're used to it. But because some instinct deeper than memory insists on registering it. Your body noting the information. The river is low. The tide went out an hour ago. The mud that's revealed at low tide smells of everything that flows through this city and settles at the river's edge. Kitchen waste, slaughterhouse runoff, tannery chemicals, human waste from 10,000 privies and twice as many chamber pots tipped from windows overnight. And underneath it all, actual river. Cold, dark, fast-moving. The Thames itself, which is a real thing, a beautiful and ancient and terrible thing, underneath all the filth that the city throws into it. You turn left. You walk. The street is not empty, even at this hour. London is never empty. There's a carter already moving somewhere ahead, the sound of wheels on stone coming through the dark before the shape of a horse and cart resolves out of the shadows. 2 men carrying something between them, barrels probably, or bolts of cloth, or the kinds of goods that move more easily in darkness. A girl, maybe 10 years old, sitting in a doorway with her knees pulled to her chest, watching you with eyes that don't ask for anything, which is worse than if they did. You walk past her. You've learned to walk past. In this city, at this hour, stopping for everything that pulls at your conscience means you never reach the market. You save your charity for the moments you can afford it, and you can't afford it this morning because Marjorie said to be at the dock by 4, and it is already 3:15, and the dock is 20 minutes away at a steady pace. You walk faster. The streets between your lodgings in Thames Street and Billingsgate Wharf take you through layers of the city, each block different from the last. Past the salters' shops, dark and shuttered, smelling of preserved things. Past the candlemaker's row, where wax and tallow hang in the air like a ghost of yesterday's work. Past the alley where the dyers work and the water running in the gutter is green. Genuinely green. the colour of spring grass, from the mordants they use on the wool. Past the church of St. Mary at Hill, its tower catching the very first suggestion of grey light in the east. Not dawn yet, not even close, just the sky's acknowledgement that dawn is eventually coming, and then you smell the fish. Fresh fish, salt fish, fish that arrived on the boats last night and is sitting in baskets on the dock, waiting for the market to open. Fish that arrived last week and didn't sell and is now expressing its displeasure at this situation in chemical terms. Fish in every register, the clean cold smell of a fresh catch, the heavier salt of a preserved one, the sharp ammoniac edge of something starting to turn, and the full, complex, layered assault of a market that has been doing this business since before most of the buildings around it were built. Billingsgate. You've been here every working day for 6 weeks, and it still does something to your chest when you turn the corner and see it. The long stretch of dock, the boats pulled, up against the wharf, the lanterns bobbing, the women already moving in the dark like they know this place with their feet and their hands and some other sense entirely. You find Marjorie by her voice. You're late. She doesn't look up when she says it. She's examining a cod by the light of a lantern, running her thumb along its belly, pressing gently to test the give of the flesh. The cod is roughly the size of a small child. It came in on a barking smack last night, one of the big fishing vessels that works the Thames estuary and the North Sea banks, and it's been sitting in a basket of shaved ice since it was caught, which means it arrived here in better condition than most. The bells haven't rung yet, you say. The bells haven't rung yet, Marjorie repeats, in a tone that suggests she finds this observation hilarious. She holds the cod closer to the lantern. Bells are for people who wait. We don't wait. This is the first thing she ever said to you, the morning 6 weeks ago when you arrived at her door with a letter of introduction from her cousin in Norwich. Your worldly possessions in a bundle, no money, no plan, and an expression that apparently announced your situation to anyone within 20 feet. Bells are for people who wait. We don't wait. You've come to understand that this is less a philosophy and more a statement of commercial reality. The fish that comes into Billingsgate in the pre-dawn hours is the freshest fish. The women who arrive first get first choice of the catch. The women who arrive second get what's left. The women who arrive at dawn, when the bells ring and the market officially opens, get the fish that the first two groups didn't want, and they pay more for it. In a trade where freshness is the only currency that matters, time is money in the most literal sense imaginable. How's the cod, you ask? Good, not great. Marjorie sets it down, wipes her thumb on her apron. Eyes are clear, gills still red, flesh gives right. But it's a day out of water, maybe a day and a half. Fine for a good household, fine for sale today, not tomorrow. She looks at you. What's the price? This is a test, it's always a test. Depends on the size. That one's, you estimate, 12, 13 pounds. A shilling for the whole fish if you're selling to a cook's house. Maybe 4p if you're breaking it for smaller buyers. Marjorie tilts her head, the way she does when you've gotten something partially right. 11.5 pounds, and a cook's house won't take the whole fish. They'll want the head removed and the guts out before they'll even look at it. 4p for the body, penny for the liver if you can find a buyer for that. Don't throw away the heads. Save them for the eel stew woman on Thames Street. She'll give you a halfpenny for 3 good heads. Even cod heads. Especially cod heads. The cheeks, she fries them. You file this away. Everything Marjorie tells you goes into a growing catalogue in your head. A library of prices and buyers and what gets sold where and for how much. This library is the actual inheritance she's offering you. Not money. Not property, Not a business you'll own on paper, but knowledge. The specific, accumulated, hard-won knowledge of 23 years of selling fish to the households of Tudor London. This knowledge is worth more than it sounds. You'll understand exactly how much more in about 2 hours. The dock is filling now. Other women arriving, most of them older than you, most of them known to Marjorie. They greet each other with the particular warmth of people who've been doing dangerous work together in the dark for a long time. Short, direct, no flourishes. Agnes. That's Ellen Sharp, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with a habit of addressing everyone by name before speaking to them, which Marjorie says she started doing after she went partially deaf in her left ear and found it helped her track conversations. Ellen, Marjorie treating you all right? She's teaching me, Ellen laughs. Same thing in her case. She drops a hand briefly on your shoulder as she passes. Not quite affectionate, not quite warning, something in between, and moves on to examine a basket of herring. The boats are tied along the wharf, maybe 15 of them, a mix of the big smacks that work the offshore banks and the smaller wherries and peter boats that work the Thames itself. The boatmen are tired. They've been out since yesterday, most of them. Some since the day before. But they're not so tired that they've stopped keeping track of prices. This is where the first negotiation of the day happens, and it happens before the sun comes up, in the smell of fish and river water, by lantern light, between women who have been doing this for decades, and men who have been sailing these waters since they were 12. It is, in its own way, extraordinary. The herring boat came in from the estuary at midnight. You know this because Thomas Finch, the boat's owner, a weathered man in his 50s with the permanently squinted eyes of someone who has spent a lifetime looking into sea wind, told Marjorie so when she arrived at 3:30, and because Marjorie checked the ice that the herring were packed in and confirmed that it hadn't fully melted yet, which means the fish have been cold the whole time, which means they're as good as herring can be after a day out of water. The boat is maybe 40 feet long, clinker-built, its overlapping planks black with tar, its single mast stowed now that it's docked. In the hold, packed in wooden boxes with shaved ice between the layers, there are perhaps 800 herring, maybe 900. Finch will know the exact number, but he's not offering that information for free. Marjorie walks the dock beside the boat, looking at the boxes without touching. This is the opening move of the negotiation, the careful examination that demonstrates you know what you're looking at without committing to anything. You stand behind her, watching. "How much?" she says finally. "6pence the 100. Finch doesn't look up from the rope he's coiling. Marjorie makes a sound that is not quite a laugh. She turns and examines a box more closely, tipping it slightly to look at the herring underneath. Fins are soft on these. They're fine. They're fine today. Tomorrow they're 1/2pence the 100 and nobody's buying. She sets the box back. 4pence. 5pence. 4pence halfpenny. Finch stops coiling. He looks at her. She looks at him. This is a conversation that has been happening between these two people in various forms for 15 years, and both of them know it, and both of them know the other one knows it, and the knowledge sits between them like a third party. "Done," he says. Marjorie turns to you. "You're taking these," she says, "all of them." Your stomach drops, not unlike the feeling you had when you first stepped into a wherry and the river tilted the world sideways. "All of them." "Ellen and I are taking the cod and the plaice. You know the herring rounds. Go." And just like that, it's your morning. Carrying a full basket of herring is a different experience from watching someone else carry a full basket of herring. This is something they don't tell you in advance. Or rather, they do tell you. But words are inadequate to the specific physical reality of 40 pounds of fish on your head. 40 pounds is not, in isolation, an impossible weight. It's roughly half of what a man of your size might carry in a single load. But 40 pounds on your head, balanced in a wide, shallow basket, with the weight distributed in a way that requires your neck and spine to become a perfectly vertical column, with no hands to stabilize it, or at least no hands you can spare for that, because your hands are busy holding the cloth pad that goes between your skull and the basket and maintaining the whole impossibly delicate equilibrium. 40 pounds on your head, in the dark, on a street made of uneven cobblestone with ruts worn into it from centuries of cartwheels, with the Thames mist coming in off the river and making the stones slick, while the bells of St. Mary at Hill are now ringing 4 o'clock and the city is beginning its morning assembly, is a completely different proposition. You learn to carry in your first week. Marjorie made you practice with an empty basket until the posture was right. Neck long, chin level, the slight bend in the knees that absorbs the shock of each step, the way you lead with your hips rather than your feet, the particular walk that isn't quite a walk but a controlled forward lean that generates momentum without disturbing the balance. You got it wrong so many times that your neck hurt for the better part of 3 days. You got it right on the 5th day, and Marjorie watched you for 60 seconds without saying anything, which you have come to understand is her equivalent of applause. Now you carry it without thinking about the mechanics. Your body knows. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It just means the hurt has become part of the work rather than a sign you're doing something wrong. Your neck aches. Your spine aches. Your feet, in their resoled boots, feel every cobblestone through the worn leather. The basket smells of fish and cold, and the particular oceanic edge that fresh herring have, that almost mineral quality like biting a piece of silver. You walk. Billingsgate to Tower Street is maybe 5 minutes. Tower Street to Fenchurch Street is another 5. From Fenchurch you turn north and then west, working through the dense residential tangle behind Leadenhall, through alleys so narrow that the upper floors of the houses on either side almost touch, through courts where multiple families share a single water pump, through the back ways of a city that contains its 60,000 people in a space you could walk from one side to the other in 20 minutes. You call as you walk. This is non-negotiable. Herring, fresh herring, herring from the estuary. 2 for a farthing, 10 for a penny. Your voice has changed since you started this work. It was never quiet. Your mother would tell you that with some exasperation. But now it has a particular carrying quality, the trained projection of someone who has learned to pitch their voice to reach windows 3 floors up, to cut through the general noise of a city street, to be heard distinctly over the clattering of carts and the arguing of neighbours and the eternal background music of a Tudor city going about its business. You call and windows open. This is the part that surprised you when you started. You expected to be largely ignored. A girl in the street with a basket of fish, anonymous among the vendors and hawkers and carters and pedestrians who fill these streets from before dawn until after dark. You expected to fight for every sale, expected resistance and indifference, and the blank face of a city too busy to notice you. Instead, windows open, doors open, familiar faces appear, because you are not, in fact, anonymous. You are Marjorie Cole's girl, working Marjorie Cole's round, and Marjorie Cole has been working this round for 17 years, and the households on this round know her and trust her in the particular way that Tudor households trust the people who feed them. This trust is not given. It is built, trade by trade, Year by year, by the delivery of good fish at a fair price, consistently, without fail, in whatever weather, at whatever time of morning they need it. By the extension of occasional credit when a household has a hard week. By the knowledge of what each household likes. Which cook wants the herring scaled before she buys? Which housekeeper trusts only female vendors on the religious principle that women don't cheat? Which house is hosting a dinner on Friday and will need twice the usual quantity? Marjorie knows all of this. She's been passing it to you in pieces every morning, every evening, over supper on the walk to the dock, a living document of the city's domestic life. Herring. The window of the house on the corner of Leadenhall opens. A woman's face appears, middle-aged, capable-looking, wearing the coif of a senior servant. "How fresh!" she calls down. "Came in at midnight. Ice-packed since they were caught. Look at the eyes." You hold one up, tilting it so the dawn light catches the dark gloss of its eye. She examines it from 3 floors up with the scepticism of someone who's been buying fish in this city for 30 years. Then, 8. You count out 8 herring with bare hands. Cold, slightly stiff, scales catching against your palms, and wrap them in the cloth she's lowered in a basket on a cord. A penny comes down in the basket on the return trip. You note it in the mental ledger. Friday, she'll want 14, you say to yourself, because this is Master Alderman Whitmore's house, and Master Alderman Whitmore hosts his business dinners on Fridays, and his cook makes a particular fried herring dish that the alderman is apparently devoted to. Marjorie told you this 3 weeks ago. You have not forgotten. The morning progresses in this rhythm, house by house, window by window. Sometimes a cook comes out to the street to examine the fish more closely. The high-end households do this, their cooks having been given standing instructions about quality that they take personally. Sometimes you sell to other vendors, the pie women who make fish pies for street sale, the tavern kitchen boys who come out with baskets of their own and buy in bulk. By the time the bells ring 6, your basket is 2/3 empty, and your hands are so cold they've gone beyond pain into a deep, architectural numbness, the kind where you can still move them, but you can't feel them move. You stop at the pump on Gracechurch Street. Fill your cupped hands with water. It's barely less cold than your fingers, but the motion of washing them brings sensation back, sharp and unpleasant, and you make a sound through your teeth that isn't quite a word. A woman at the pump gives you a look. Then she sees the empty basket, the apron, the state of your hands. "Billingsgate?" she asks. "Yes." She nods, the way people nod when they've recognised something they understand. Then she goes back to filling her bucket. By 7 o'clock your basket is empty. You find Marjorie on Gracechurch Street, also empty-handed, eating a piece of bread and a bit of hard cheese, standing in a doorway out of the wind with the proprietary ease of a woman who's been using this particular doorway as a breakfast spot for a long time. She hands you a piece of bread without being asked. You eat it without saying anything. The bread is dense and slightly sour, and the best thing you've eaten since yesterday's supper, because moving 40 pounds of herring through 2 miles of Tudor London streets apparently burns everything your body has stored. "Good morning," she asks. "Sold out." "How long?" 3 hours. She makes a face that might be satisfaction or might be calculation. "Should be 2.5. You spent too long at the Whitmore house." She wanted to inspect them. Alderman Whitmore's cook always wants to inspect them. You let her inspect for 1 minute, not 3. You know the fish are good. She knows the fish are good. The inspection is a performance. She wants to feel she's doing her job. You let her do it for 60 seconds. Then you tell her you've got 6 other houses waiting and you need to keep moving. She'll buy. How do you know she'll buy if you rush her? Because she's been buying from me for 11 years and she's never not bought. Marjorie tears off another piece of bread. You're being polite when you should be confident. Politeness in this trade is a waste of time, not rudeness. Rudeness closes doors. Confidence. She buys from us because we bring good fish, not because we're nice. Understand the difference. You understand the difference. You're still learning to enact it, which is a separate problem. I made, you count mentally, 3 shillings 4p. Marjorie holds out her hand. You count the coins into it. The pennies and halfpennies and farthings from 60 individual transactions spread across an hour's walking, each one small, each one adding to the whole. She counts them again, nods. Keep 6p for yourself. The rest goes to the morning's costs. What we paid Finch, the ice, the baskets. What's left after that goes into the fund. The fund. This is the word Marjorie uses for something that does not have an official name because officially it does not exist. You'll learn its full shape over the weeks ahead, but the outline is this. Over the years, Marjorie and 6 other fishwives have built a common pool of money. Not a guild. They're not allowed a guild, which we'll get to in a moment. And not a formal partnership, because if they formalised it, someone with power would want a piece of it. Just an agreement, maintained in memory and in trust, between 7 women who've been working the same trade in the same city long enough to understand each that there are things they can do together that none of them can do alone. The fund pays for ice in summer, when ice is expensive, and the difference between fresh fish and spoiled fish is the difference between a profitable week and a devastating one. It pays for the dock fees that the city levies on fish sellers, which are technically negotiated every year and are in practice whatever the harbour master decides he can get away with. It pays the small, regular bribes to the constables whose beats cover the market and who could make every morning much more difficult if they chose to. Most importantly, it extends credit. Alderman Whitmore's cook will ask about credit next week, Marjorie says. The alderman's had a bad quarter, some venture of his in the wool trade that didn't go well. The household is watching its pennies. She'll ask if we can hold a bill for 30 days. Can we? We can hold a bill for 30 days for a household that's been paying us reliably for 11 years, and where the alderman himself earns enough in a good month to pay us 6 times over. Yes. And if he doesn't pay? Marjorie looks at you for a moment. The look has something in it that isn't quite amusement. He'll pay, and if he doesn't, I'll know it by the 3rd week, and I'll stop extending and start collecting. And if he still doesn't pay, I'll let it be known in the market and on the rounds that his household is in difficulty. And in this city, reputation is collateral. She pauses. That's what the other fishwives are for. 7 of us means 7 rounds. 7 rounds means every cook and housekeeper in a quarter-mile knows within a week if a household has stopped paying its accounts. You look at her. That's how the empire works, you say. Not quite a question. Marjorie finishes her bread, brushes the crumbs off her apron. That's how the empire works, she agrees, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. You need to understand something about the fish trade in Tudor London, and understanding it requires going back about 300 years, and I know that sounds like a long way back, but stick with me because this is where the whole story gets its teeth. The Worshipful Company of Fishmongers is one of the oldest livery companies in London. It was granted its charter in the 14th century, and at various points it has held enormous power over the fish trade. The right to inspect fish sold in the city, the right to set prices, the right to exclude non-members from selling fish in quantity. For most of the medieval period, if you wanted to sell fish commercially in London, you needed the fishmongers' company's approval. Women were not admitted to the fishmongers' company. Women could not be full members of any livery company. A widow could theoretically continue her dead husband's business under the guild's banner, but an independent woman, a woman operating on her own account, that was a different category entirely, one that the guild's charter didn't quite address, and the guild itself preferred to ignore. So here is the contradiction that Tudor London lives with every morning, right at the junction between law and necessity. The city of London cannot feed itself without its fishwives. This is not a slight exaggeration. This is a straightforward logistical fact. The Fishmongers' Company's members, the licensed, formally organised, officially recognised fish merchants, operate at a scale that serves the wealthy and the wholesale trade. They sell to innkeepers, to institutions, to the large households of rich merchants and nobles. They deal in large quantities with storage facilities and accounts and the machinery of formal commerce. They do not, in general, carry a basket from house to house in the narrow streets behind Leadenhall at 5 a.m. But 60,000 people need to eat, and most of those 60,000 people live in those narrow streets, and most of those 60,000 people buy their fish one handful at a time, 2 herring for a farthing, from women who walk the rounds. Without the fishwives, those 60,000 people go without fish, and in a city where Friday fasting is not yet optional, this is still officially a Catholic requirement even under Elizabeth's Protestant settlement. The fasting laws are still technically in force because the Crown wants the fishing industry to keep training sailors. Fish is not a luxury. Fish is a requirement. Fish is a political matter, so the city tolerates the fishwives, officially doesn't recognise them, can't quite suppress them, and the Fishmongers' Company watches them with the expression of an organisation that would very much like to control something but can't quite figure out how. This is the world Marjorie Cole operates in. She is tolerated but not recognised. Her trade is necessary but technically irregular. She has no charter, no guild membership, no official standing. On paper, she barely exists as a commercial entity. In practice, she feeds a quarter of the City of London's working population and has done so for 23 years. The guildmen came by last month, she says, as you walk back toward Billingsgate for the midday delivery. The morning round is done. Now comes the second round. The larger shipments to the taverns and cook shops that take quantities too big for a basket. What did they want? What they always want. To formalise us. They proposed a licensing system. We pay a fee, we get a certificate, we're official. Her tone is perfectly neutral, the way it gets when she's describing something she finds outrageous, but has decided not to waste energy being outraged by. That sounds, you start, like control, she finishes. The fee is the least of it. The fee we could pay. The certificate is the weapon. Once you have a certificate, you can have a certificate revoked. Once you have a license, you can have a license suspended. Once you're inside their system, they decide the rules. They decide who can sell what, where, at what prices. She pauses to let a cart pass. Right now, they cannot stop me selling herring on Gracechurch Street. No law gives them that power. because the law doesn't officially know I'm doing it. The moment I accept their certificate, they can suspend my certificate for selling at the wrong price, and the wrong price will be whatever price they decide is wrong." "What did you say to them?" "I told them I was grateful for the honour, but I didn't see how a small street trader like myself could justify the administrative burden of formal registration, and that I was sure they had more important matters to attend to." She says this with the absolute straightness of face. They believed you. They believed that arguing with me was going to take longer than it was worth. She turns onto Lower Thames Street. That's another skill you need, knowing when the most effective response is to make yourself smaller and duller than you are. Men underestimate women who appear to underestimate themselves. Use it when you need it. You walk in silence for a moment, the city busy around you. "Do you think they'll try again?" Marjorie is quiet for a beat. "Yes," she says simply. "I think they'll try again. I want to tell you about the fish, because we've been talking about trade and empire and guild politics, and all of that is true and important, but underneath it, literally underneath it, in the baskets on the dock and the holds of the boats and the cold, dark waters of the Thames and the North Sea beyond, is the actual fish, and the fish are extraordinary. Tudor England is a fishing culture in a way that's hard to fully appreciate from where you're standing centuries later, with refrigeration and global supply chains and farmed salmon available at any supermarket. In 1572, the sea is protein. The sea is the primary source of animal food for anyone who can't afford to keep livestock. Not just herring, although herring, preserved in salt or smoked, is the staple, the bread equivalent of the sea, but cod, plaice, sole, mackerel, sprat, eel, oyster, mussel, crab, whelk. The Thames itself still runs with fish in a way that will be entirely gone by the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution renders it biologically dead. Right now, salmon run in the Thames above London. Sturgeon, actual sturgeon, occasionally come upriver from the estuary. The Thames near its mouth teems with eel and sprat and the small silvery masses of white bait. The boats that bring this to Billingsgate come from everywhere. The smacks from Barking, east of London, that work the North Sea herring grounds, following the herring shoals as they move south from Scotland in late summer and autumn. The women of Yarmouth and Lowestoft gutting and salting as fast as their hands can work, the boats racing south to get the freshest fish to London before the competition. The Icelandic trade, boats that go all the way to Icelandic waters for cod, the long-haul voyages that take months and carry enormous risk and come back loaded with salt cod that will keep for a year, that will feed the entire country through winter. The oyster dredgers from the Essex marshes, small boats working the shallow tidal waters, their crews hauling up the dredge nets by hand, sorting the oysters by size and quality, packing them in barrels of seawater for the trip upriver. And the Thames fishermen themselves, the men with the small boats, the Peter boats, and punts and wherries that work the river from Westminster to Gravesend, setting their eel traps and their stake nets and their long lines, living a life that is half on the water and half in the city, belonging to both and fully to neither. All of this comes to Billingsgate. You know the boats now, or you're learning them. This is another thing in Marjorie's library. Which boats to trust, which captains price honestly, which ones have a habit of putting their worst fish on top of the basket and their oldest fish underneath, which ones use short measures and which ones round up. Old Finch shorts you by 10 herring in 100 if you're not watching, she told you in your second week. Not enough to make a scene about. Just enough to add up. I'll watch him count. Isn't he dishonest? It's normal. You watch everyone count. She paused. You watch me count too when you're managing your own transactions. Don't assume trust. Verify. This is how she teaches everything. Not with rules, but with specific examples that contain the rule inside them. She doesn't say, be vigilant. She says, Finch shorts you by 10 herring. The lesson is the same, but the specific detail means you remember it, because it's attached to a person and a place and a morning, not just a principle. At the midday sale, there's a different kind of fish. The morning's freshest catch is gone, distributed through the city's households by the rounds. What arrives mid-morning is the overnight boats from further out. Larger catches, some of it meant for salting and preservation rather than immediate sale, some of it for the taverns and cookshops that feed London's enormous population of workers who eat their midday meal out rather than going home. You carry a basket of plaice from the dock to the Mermaid on Thames Street, then a half-barrel of salt herring to the cookshop on Eastcheap, where they make the herring pie that the porters and dockers buy for a halfpenny and eat standing on the street. Then back for another load. Your neck aches. Your feet ache. Your hands have moved through numb and are now in a state of constant low-grade protest that you've decided to simply not engage with. Marjorie's hands, the leather of them, 23 years of this. You understand now in your body what those hands cost. But she moves through the market and the streets like water through a channel. Not quick exactly, but absolutely without friction. Her body oriented always toward the next task, the next negotiation, the next customer, the next boat coming in at the dock. She's never not working. Even when she's eating bread in a doorway, she's watching the street, noting which vendors are doing good business and which are slow, which boats are in, what the prices are doing. She's been doing this since she was about your age, when her own mother brought her down to Billingsgate from the house in Cheapside and taught her the morning round and the names of the boats and the faces of the captains. Her mother did it for 20 years before her. Her grandmother, she thinks, did it for a while too. The records are uncertain because women in this business don't make records. That's its own kind of empire, not written down anywhere, not officially recognised, not legally protected, just carried, person to person, mother to daughter, for as long as anyone can remember. The city teaches you in ways that don't feel like lessons. By the time you've been working the Billingsgate rounds for a month, you know things you didn't know you were learning. You know which streets flood when it rains and which run fast enough that the rain clears them. You know which corners catch the wind and which are sheltered, which matters more than it should when you're standing outside in November trying to sell fish. You know which dock constables are lazy and which are trouble, which market officials accept a small consideration, and which ones are genuinely trying to enforce the regulations. You know the tides. This last one is the most important and the strangest to learn. The Thames is tidal all the way up through London. The salt water pushes in from the estuary twice a day, and the river responds, rising and falling 6, 8, sometimes 10 feet depending on the season and the moon. The boats that come into Billingsgate time their arrivals to the tide, coming upstream on the flood and leaving on the ebb. The dock itself changes character through the day. At high water, the boats are level with the dock and unloading is easy. At low water, they're 6 feet below and everything has to be lifted up. The tide affects the smell, the price, the mood of the market, the quality of the fish. You learn to read it the way you learn to read a face. Tide's coming in, you say one morning, not because you've checked or been told, but because the smell changed. Less mud, more salt, something freshening in the air. Marjorie looks at the river. About an hour out, she confirms. Big flood today, maybe an hour after the peak. How do you know it'll be a big flood? Moon was full last night. Full moon, big tides, always. She watches the river for a moment. Something in her expression that isn't quite worry, but isn't nothing. Autumn full moon floods have been getting worse. Last year the water came up to the market stairs. Year before that got halfway up Thames Street. What happens to the fish? The fish don't care. The baskets, the stalls, the carts, that's what you worry about. And the boats, if they're not tied right. She looks at the river one more second longer than she needs to. Then she moves on. You remember that look. The trouble, when it comes, doesn't announce itself. It arrives on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after Marjorie's conversation about the guild, in the form of 3 men in aldermanic livery, and an official of the fishmongers' company named Edmund Croft, who has a ledger under his arm and an expression of pained patience that says he is doing everyone a favour just by being here. Marjorie sees them come in before they reach the dock. She doesn't change her expression or her pace. She finishes examining the mackerel she's been holding and hands it to you. Buy these, she says quietly. All of them. Don't haggle, just buy at the asking price. Then start loading the baskets. You turn toward the mackerel boat. Behind you, you hear Croft's voice. Mistress Cole. Master Croft. She sounds genuinely pleased to see him. This is the performance she told you about. What brings you to the dock at this hour? A matter of registration, he says. We've been patient, I think you'll agree. The company has been offering an accommodation for independent traders, a way to regularise your activities, give you a proper standing. I'm grateful for the thought, Marjorie says warmly. I've discussed it with my husband. You almost drop the mackerel. Marjorie is a widow, has been for 12 years. Everyone at this market knows that. But Edmund Croft doesn't know that, or has forgotten, or hasn't done his research because he says. And what does he think? He agrees it's a very generous offer and promises to give it full consideration. A pause. He's been unwell, I'm afraid. The autumn cold. Nothing serious. But he asked me to handle his business affairs while he recovers. This is a lie so smooth and so confidently delivered that it takes you 3 full seconds to recognise it as a lie. And in those 3 seconds, Croft's expression has shifted from official authority to the particular awkward register of a man dealing with another man's domestic affairs through an intermediary. I see. Well, if he could, I'll pass along everything you've said. He'll be in contact, I'm sure. It may take a week or 2, you understand, with his health. She sounds genuinely apologetic. Would you like some mackerel for your table, Master Croft? These are very fresh. Came in last night from Gravesend. Croft looks at her, looks at the mackerel, looks at the 3 men in aldermanic livery, who are trying to look authoritative and mostly just look cold. Perhaps next time, he says stiffly. Of course. I'll tell my husband you stopped by. They leave. You wait until they're out of earshot, then. You don't have a husband. I know that. You know that. Tom Finch over there knows that. She takes the mackerel from you, begins sorting them by size. Edmund Croft is embarrassed to have not known that, and the embarrassment will slow him down for a few weeks, while he decides whether to come back and look foolish or find a different approach, which gives us time. Time for what? She doesn't answer immediately. She stacks 3 mackerel in the bottom of a basket, adds a layer of ice chips, adds more mackerel. Her hands move with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this is as automatic as breathing. I had a conversation with some of the other women last week, she says finally. We've been thinking about the guild problem for a while. There may be a way to get ahead of it. What kind of way? The city has a mechanism for recognising informal trade associations, not guilds. Women can't form guilds, but something similar. A group of traders who agree to common standards, common prices, common practices, common conduct. She looks at you. The guild can't easily ban an association that's voluntarily adopted the same quality standards they require of their licensed traders. It makes our argument harder to counter. So you'd become what? Like a guild that isn't called a guild? Like a guild that cannot be controlled by the guild? She says it simply. If we set our own standards, inspect our own fish, discipline our own members for selling bad goods, we've taken away their main argument for needing to regulate us, which is that without their oversight the public will be sold rotten fish by unscrupulous women. She pauses. We've been making sure not to sell rotten fish for 3 generations, but that's not the same as being able to prove it. You think about this. It's more complicated than buying herring. It requires a kind of thinking that goes beyond the morning round, beyond the individual transaction, into something that looks like strategy. How many of the other women agree? 6 of 7. She adjusts the ice on the basket. The 7th is Catherine Webb, who thinks any formal agreement invites scrutiny we don't want. She may be right, but she may also be wrong. What do you think? Marjorie looks at the dock, at the boats, at the city spreading behind them in the morning light. I think the guild is coming one way or another, she says. The question is whether we walk into that room or they drag us into it. There's a moment in the middle of every busy morning when the market reaches something like a peak. Every dock space is occupied, every woman is in motion, every transaction is happening simultaneously. Prices being called, coins changing hands, baskets being filled and carried away, the boats unloading, the ice melting, the fish in constant transit from water to basket to sail. In this moment, if you can stop for 30 seconds, which you mostly can't, Billingsgate is remarkable, not beautiful exactly. It's a fish market at dawn. The smell alone has a physical presence. The ground is wet with fish water and river splash and the spillage of ice. There are ropes underfoot and baskets being swung and the constant traffic of women moving in every direction, with the directional certainty of people who have memorized this space. But there's something in it, something in the density of the life, the purposefulness of it, the sheer functional energy of 60 women feeding a city before most of that city is awake. You're part of it now, or you're becoming part of it. The work is getting into your body in the way that real work does, not just in the ache of muscles and the toughening of skin, but in the reflexes, the automatic responses, the knowledge that lives now in your hands and your feet, and the angle of your neck rather than in your thinking mind. You see a basket poorly loaded from across the dock, fish stacked too high, weight off-centre, and you know before it happens that it's going to tip, and you're already taking a step toward it before your conscious mind has processed the observation. The basket tips. You catch it. Not perfectly. 3 herring escape onto the dock and you lose them to a gull in the time it takes to blink. But the rest are saved. The girl who was carrying it, younger than you, first or second week, look of permanent overwhelm, stares at you. Spread the weight lower, you say. Centre the heavy ones on the bottom, pack the sides tight. She nods, looks at the basket. You watch her repack it, correcting the angle. Better, you say. You walk away. You haven't asked her name, and you haven't been Marjorie-level confident about it. You're aware that you had a slight edge of uncertainty in your voice that Marjorie never has, but you gave her the information she needed, and that's something. Later, Marjorie will see this exchange from across the dock and say nothing about it, but you'll catch the look she directs your way for half a second. Not quite a smile, something more useful than a smile. Half an hour before noon, the tide changes. You feel it before you see it. There's a shift in the sound of the water, something in the specific rhythm of the river lapping at the dock. Pilings changes, the pace of it altering, the pattern becoming irregular for a few minutes and then settling into something different. Then the water starts rising. This is normal. This happens twice a day. You've watched it happen every morning for 6 weeks, the tide coming in, the boats lifting, the surface of the river climbing the stone stairs that descend from the dock to the water. But this morning is different. This morning the moon is in its last night of full, and the autumn rains have been filling the rivers upstream for 2 weeks, and where the Thames normally rises 4 or 5 feet on the flood tide, this morning it rises 6, 7, and then continues. Marjorie says, "Get the baskets up." Her voice has a particular quality you haven't heard before. Not panic. She doesn't do panic, but urgency. Real urgency. The kind that skips explanation and goes straight to instruction. The market moves. The women who have been on this dock for years know what this voice means. They're moving before you've fully processed the instruction, lifting baskets off the ground, stacking them on the high carts, moving the unsold fish to the back of the dock where the ground is a foot higher, repositioning the boats. You grab the nearest basket. Salt cod, heavy, already sold this morning but not yet collected by the cook shop boy who was supposed to come for it at noon, and swing it onto your shoulder and carry it up the steps at the dock's edge to the street level above. By the time you come back for the second basket, the water is over the bottom step. By the time you come back for the third, it's over the second. The river is doing something you haven't seen it do before. The normal rhythms of the flood tide, the steady rise, the peak, the hesitation before it turns, are not happening. The water is rising continuously without the usual plateau, fed by both the sea's tide pushing in and the rain-swollen Thames pushing down. Agnes! Marjorie from the top of the dock steps, not shouting. She doesn't shout in emergencies, she speaks more quietly, precisely, so you have to pay attention. The mackerel, the big crate. The big crate is at the far end of the dock in the lowest spot, already surrounded by water that's lapping over the dock surface in small waves. 40 pounds of mackerel, the morning's purchase, enough to represent a significant portion of the week's working capital. You move toward it. The water on the dock surface is cold, not as cold as it should be for November, but cold enough. And it's moving, pushed by the wind and the force of the rising river, and it's up to your ankles now, soaking through your boots immediately because your boots are old and the resoling is not waterproof. You reach the crate. It's too heavy to carry alone. You look back. Ellen Sharp is at the dock edge, in water to her knees, steadying a boat that started to drag at its mooring. She sees you with the crate, reads the situation, shouts something to the woman behind her, and comes splashing toward you. Between you, you lift the crate. It's heavier than you expected, or your arms are more tired than you thought, or the cold water is taking something from your muscles that makes everything cost more. Your hands are back to full pain now, the cold finding every crack in your skin at once. You carry the crate to the steps. By the time you reach the stairs, the water is knee-deep on the dock. The boats are straining at their ropes. One of the smaller wherries has come loose from its mooring and is sitting at an odd angle, bumping against the dock with a hollow wooden sound. Ellen goes back for something. You carry the crate up the steps. At the top, Marjorie takes it from you. Your hands are shaking. The cold has gotten past the superficial pain and into your joints. You go back down. The flood lasts 4 hours. In those 4 hours the dock is impassable, and Billingsgate Market becomes a different place entirely. Less a trading post, more a kind of emergency station. Women standing on the elevated sections of the dock and the steps and the street, watching the water, assessing losses, improvising. The losses, as it turns out, are smaller than they might have been. The women here have seen this before. Not this exact flood. This is a bigger one than last year, the water 2 feet higher than usual. But flood, as a category, is part of the understanding of this place. The baskets lifted, the crates moved. The fish that were at risk are now stacked in doorways and on carts and on any elevated surface available. And while the cold water continues to creep across the dock, the catch is mostly safe. Mostly. Tom Finch lost a crate of cod from his boat. The rope holding his cargo net snapped and the crate went into the river, and the cod are somewhere in the Thames now, feeding the eels that live in the dark below. He stands on his deck and watches the water with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. An oyster seller whose name you don't know yet had her entire morning's inventory swept off the dock in the first rush. She's standing at the edge, looking at the river, not moving. There's nothing to be done about it, and she knows there's nothing to be done about it, and she's doing the thing where you stand and accept a loss because accepting it is the only option. Marjorie finds you standing on the dock steps, your boots soaked through, your arms aching from the carrying. "Good work," she says. "We saved most of it." "We saved most of it," she agrees. The mackerel are fine. Ellen's base are fine. The barking cod is fine. Finch lost his cargo net. Finch should have tied his cargo net better. But she doesn't say it unkindly. She looks at the river, which is now as high as it's going to get, the flow easing as the flood tide peaks. 3 or 4 years ago, that crate of mackerel would have gone in the river with Finch's cod. We didn't have enough people moving fast enough. What changed? We got organised. She says it simply. 7 of us, same dock, same market, every morning. When the flood alarm goes, when I use that voice, the one you heard, everyone knows what to do. Who takes what, which boats to save first, who calls the constables if it gets too big to handle. We drilled it, she pauses. Catherine Webb thought drilling was unnecessary. That was 3 years ago. After the flood, she agreed we were right. You absorb this. It wasn't just about the fish, you say slowly. Nothing's just about the fish. She turns from the river. Come on, tide's turning. We've got afternoon rounds. Your boots squelch. Your feet are cold and wet, and you have about 4 hours left before you can take your boots off. The dock behind you is still wet, the carts and baskets slowly being returned to their places by women who are doing what Marjorie does, accepting the disruption, recalculating, moving forward. The afternoon rounds, you adjust the basket on your head, you walk. There is, in Marjorie's room above the shop on Thames Street, a book. Not a ledger exactly. It's a small, battered notebook with covers made of boiled leather, the pages inside covered in Marjorie's handwriting, which is functional rather than elegant. The letters large and slightly slanted, the result of someone who learned to write as an adult and writes frequently enough to be competent, but never quite naturally. In this book are the accounts, every household on the 3 rounds, what they owe, what they've paid, how reliable their payment is, notes on their circumstances. This house changed cook in September. New one prefers plaice over herring. And on their credit. Holds bills for 30 days reliably, never 40 and paid promptly, good standing and occasionally slow to pay, watch, limit credit. There are also, in a smaller hand toward the back of the book, notes on the boats, which captains have been honest in recent months, which ones have been having trouble, the bad catch weeks, the equipment failures, the illnesses that hit a fishing crew and knock them out for a fortnight. There are small sums extended to some of the fishermen, recorded here, loans that are repaid in priority of service, first right to buy when the tide brings them in, slightly better prices held for them when the market is slow. This is the Book of the Empire, not a grand word for it. Marjorie would find the word slightly absurd, you think. She doesn't think of herself as building an empire. She thinks of herself as managing relationships, which is what an empire is, if you strip away the grandeur. Relationships, managed consistently over time. She lets you read it, one evening in October, sitting by the fire in the back room of the house she rents on Thames Street. The fire small because coal costs money and the nights aren't quite cold enough yet to justify more than a small fire. The Whitmore account, you say, finding the entry. 11 years, never once gone past 40 days, even in his worst quarter. The tavern on Fenchurch. You find it. This says credit suspended, autumn last year. Ownership changed. New owner was buying fish from 3 different sources and paying the one who complained loudest. I stopped extending and they came back. A pause. They came back with better terms. How do you know when to extend and when to cut off? How long did they hesitate when you arrived at the door? What? If you arrive at a house and the cook comes to the door quickly, pays quickly, sends you away quickly, that house is functioning normally. If she takes longer than usual, if she hesitates before the money, if she starts asking about credit when she's never asked before, that house is having a bad month. She takes the book from you, turns to a page toward the back. You read people the same way you read fish. You look for the signs of trouble before the trouble becomes visible. You think about this. The cook at the Whitmore house, you say. She took longer than usual last Friday. Marjorie is quiet for a moment. I noticed that too, she says. We'll keep an eye on it. She closes the book, sets it on the table, looks at the fire. My mother kept a book like this, she says. Different customers, different routes, some of the same boats. Tom Finch's father, before Tom. A pause. When she died, the book came to me. I'd been working with her for 6 years by then, so most of it I already knew. But there were accounts in there I didn't know about. Small things. Loans she'd made that were still being repaid. I found out about them because the people came to pay them after she died. Came to me, because I was her daughter, and paid her debts to me. She says this last part with something in her voice that isn't quite pride. Closer to wonder, maybe. The wonder of trust that outlasts the person it was given to. How old were you when she died? 26. Marjorie stands, moves toward the window. Outside, Thames Street is quieter in the evening. The carters and vendors gone home. Only the sound of the river and the occasional footstep. You'll keep a book, she says. Not yet. You're still learning the routes, the faces. But when you know them well enough to remember the exceptions, you start writing them down. When will that be? She looks at you. When you stop needing to ask me. Sunday's different. You're not required to work on Sunday. The market is officially closed on Sunday. The law says so, though in practice there are women who work the back alleys and private transactions, and the city does not look too hard at these arrangements. Marjorie works a partial Sunday. She has accounts to settle, suppliers to check on, the ongoing management of a business that doesn't fully stop just because the law says it should. But for you, Sunday morning is free. And on this particular Sunday in early November, 3 weeks after the flood, you walk to London Bridge. You've been avoiding it in the specific way you avoid things that you know will hit you harder than you're ready for. The bridge is visible from the dock every morning. The long, crowded line of buildings that turns the city's crossing of the Thames into a street suspended over water. And every morning you note it and file it for later. Later is today. You go in the morning when the bridge is at its most populated and least sinister. The sun is out, which is not a guarantee in November and feels like a gift when it happens. The light coming off the river in bright fragments. The water between the bridge's massive piers rushing and churning in the way it always does at mid-tide. From the south end of the bridge, London announces itself like a declaration. The skyline is dominated by St. Paul's, the old St. Paul's, not the Wren Cathedral that will replace it 100 years from now after the Great Fire, but the medieval one, enormous and slightly Gothic, and topped by a spire that makes it the tallest thing you've seen except sky. The spire was struck by lightning in 1561, 11 years ago, and has not yet been fully repaired. You can see the stump of it from here, awkward and truncated like a word crossed out. Below the spire, the city in cross-section. Church towers everywhere. London has more than 100 parish churches, and you can see dozens from here, their roof lines at various heights, their bells going at various times in a kind of organised chaos that you've learned to sort into individual voices. Every morning you hear them and know roughly where you are and what time it is. Up close, the churches are stone and wood and mortar. From here, they're part of the city's profile, the accumulated evidence of centuries of habitation and belief. The river itself from here is astonishing. You see it every morning at water level from the dock, which gives you proximity and specificity, but not scope. From the bridge you see the whole thing, the width of it, the curve as it bends toward Westminster, the forest of masts in the Pool of London where the ocean-going ships anchor to load and unload. There are maybe 40 ships in the pool right now, maybe 50. Their masts make a geometric thicket against the sky, the rigging between them like a complicated sentence in a language you don't read. Some of those ships have come from the Mediterranean, some from the Baltic, some, increasingly, from the New World that's been attached to the edges of maps for the last 80 years and is still being figured out. All of them come up the Thames through London's harbour. All of them stop here, in this bend of the river, before proceeding to the specialised docks or sending their goods upriver by lighter. The fish trade is one small tributary of all this. The herring and mackerel and cod that Marjorie and the women of Billingsgate handle every morning are a single note in the enormous chord of the world's trade that passes through this city. It doesn't feel small from inside it. Nothing that takes everything you have feels small, but from up here you can see the scale of what surrounds it. You stand at the rail of the bridge for a long time. Below you, the Thames rushes through the arches, The current squeezed by the bridge's piers into something fast and turbulent. You can see the whitecaps where the water compresses and speeds up, can feel the slight vibration of the bridge itself under your feet as the water pushes against the ancient stone. The bridge has been here for 400 years. These stone piers you're standing on were set in the riverbed in the 1170s. Henry II was king. The Plantagenet dynasty was new, and yet the river has been pushing against these same stones for those 400 years. The tide's doing what they always do, and the bridge has been here. A city on a river crossing, houses and shops, and at the south end, the heads of executed traitors spiked on the gate. There are 2 heads up there right now. You notice them coming in. You've noticed them every time you've walked near the bridge. You've been not looking at them deliberately, but this morning you look, because you've decided to stop flinching from the full reality of where you live. 2 men, or what's left of them after some weeks on the spike. You don't know their names. They'll have been posted for treason. The bridgeheads are reserved for traitors, not common criminals, though the distinction feels academic from here. The city puts its warnings at the gates. It has always done this. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, whatever you might be thinking, the heads are a reminder of the distance between being in this city alive and working and not being in it, or not being anywhere at all. You look at the heads long enough to acknowledge them. Then you look back at the river, the pool of London, the ships, the masts, the Billingsgate dock just visible if you look east, the low wooden structure, the steps down to the water, the space where 40 women will be working before dawn tomorrow, with the same basin of cold water and the same cracked hands, and the same 40 pounds on their heads, and the city behind all of it. St. Paul's, truncated and grand, the church towers, the smoke from 10,000 chimneys rising into the November air, dispersing, becoming part of the sky. You came from Norwich with 20 shillings and a letter of introduction, and the understanding that you were going to learn a trade from a woman who was known for teaching people things they could use. You have learned things. You've learned how the tides work and how fish prices move, and how to carry 40 pounds without spilling it, and how to read whether a household is having a bad month, and how to negotiate without seeming to negotiate, and how to walk past someone in a doorway who needs help and reconcile that with who you're trying to be. You've learned that the city is larger and harsher and more intricate than you understood, and that being useful in it requires a kind of knowledge that cannot be found in books, or rather, can only be found in books like Marjorie's battered leather notebook, which is a different kind of book than the ones clergymen mean when they talk about learning. You've learned that the women who feed this city are invisible in the way that necessary things are invisible, noticed only when absent, taken for granted when present, their labour fundamental and their status formal zero. You think about that. You think about Marjorie with her 23 years, and her credit accounts, and her 7-woman association, and her plan to outmaneuver the Fishmongers' Guild through the specific legal mechanism of voluntary quality standards. You think about her mother's book and the accounts that were still being paid to Marjorie after her mother died because the trust held past the person. Some things don't go in the official record. Some things are passed differently. Person to person, morning to morning, one cracked hand to another. From the bridge, London spreads out on both sides of you like an argument. It says, "You're small, you're temporary, you will leave nothing." And maybe that's true. But you think about the girl on the dock this morning, the one with the poorly loaded basket, and how you told her to spread the weight lower and centre the heavy ones at the bottom. And she remembered it. You could see her remembering it. That's something. Edmund Croft comes back to the dock on a Wednesday morning in late November. This time he doesn't pretend to be a courtesy visit. He's brought 2 men with him who are clearly not courtesy, solidly built, wearing the Fishmongers' Company livery, holding nothing but their arms and their presence, and he's done his research about Marjorie's husband. "My condolences on your loss," he says, "though I understand it was some years ago." His tone has something in it that is trying to be gentle and failing, the way a door tries to be quiet when you're pushing it hard. Marjorie receives this information with a nod. "Thank you. It was. In which case, you'll understand that the accommodation we offered regarding your husband's involvement is no longer applicable," Marjorie says. "I understand." "Then you understand that independent trading without proper registration—" "Which regulation would that be, Master Croft?" A pause, brief but real. "The company's oversight of licensed fishmongers, yes. I'm familiar with the charter." She looks at him with an expression of perfect attention. "I'm not a licensed fishmonger. I'm a street trader. The company's charter doesn't extend to street traders. The City of London's regulations on street trading are administered by the ward alderman, not by the Fishmongers' Company." Croft's expression undergoes a series of small adjustments that, taken together, describe the experience of having expected an easy morning and being given a different morning. Mistress Cole. "I have here," she sees, producing a folded piece of paper from somewhere in her apron. "You have no idea when she got this. You've been with her since 4 o'clock, which means she was carrying it before you arrived. A letter from Alderman Whitmore's household confirming their long-standing account with me, and here, a second sheet. A similar letter from the cook shop on Eastcheap, and here. Third sheet. A declaration from 6 other women traders operating on these docks that we have agreed to adopt a set of quality standards, which I have taken the liberty of writing up, and which I believe you'll find consistent with your own company's requirements for licensed traders." She holds out the papers. Croft looks at the papers, looks at her, looks at the men behind him. "This is not," he starts. "I think you'll find it is, actually," says a voice from your left. You turn. Ellen Sharp is there. Behind her, 5 other women, in their market clothes, their baskets beside them, their expressions arranged into the particular configuration of people who've been waiting for a specific moment and have arrived at it on time. 6 of the 7. Catherine Webb isn't here. Her reservations about formalisation are apparently intact, but 6 of 7 means everything Croft can see is a solid line of women who have been doing this business for a long time and have prepared for this conversation. He looks at the papers in Marjorie's hand, looks at the women, looks at his 2 hired men who are looking less certain by the second about what their role in this situation is. "I'll need to take this to the company. Court," he says, finally. "Of course," Marjorie says. "We'd welcome the court's review. The standards document is thorough, I think." He takes the papers. He leaves. The women watch him go. You look at Marjorie. "You planned this," you say. "We planned this," she says. 6 weeks ago, when he first came, Ellen drafted the standards document and typed it fair. She nods at a grey-haired woman you know from the herring rounds. "I wrote the letters to the accounts. It took time. What happens now? Now we wait for the court, which takes months. And during those months we keep trading, keep working to the standards, and build as much of a record as we can before anyone has to make a formal ruling. She picks up her basket. In 6 months, either the court rules in our favour, or it rules against us, and we find another argument. But in 6 months we'll have 6 months more of documented compliance than we have now. And if they rule against you, she looks at you. Then we find out what Catherine Webb thinks, she says, and we start that conversation. December arrives with the particular conviction of a Tudor winter, which means it arrives early and plans to stay. The Thames doesn't freeze this year. It's cold, but not that cold. The river running too fast from the autumn rains to stop even in the hardest nights. But the dock is iced in the mornings, a thin rind of ice on the wooden planks that you learn to test with your weight before you commit to each step. The way Marjorie does it. This slight shift of the front foot before you transfer your weight. The baskets are heavier. The fish are colder. Your hands ache in a way that's no longer just discomfort, but a continuous low background noise in your body. Like the sound of the city, always there, part of the texture of existence now. You buy a pair of mittens from a woman in the market who makes them from old blanket wool, thick and slightly felted, with the fingers cut off so your hands can still work. They cost twopence that you don't entirely have. You decide to have them anyway. The mittens make a difference, not a large one. But twopence worth of difference is twopence worth of difference. Feet, Ellen tells you, watching you put the mittens on for the first time. In the cold, you lose the cold in your hands first and your feet second. The feet are worse because you can't feel them going. What do you do for feet? Extra stockings, tallow on the skin before you put them on, keeps the cold from getting in. You add this to the library. The rounds change in December. The households are preparing for Christmas. 12 days of celebration in a city that still, officially Protestant or not, takes the Christmas feast seriously. This means more fish, not less. Advent is a fasting period. Fish rather than meat. And the households are stocking up on salt cod and pickled herring for the weeks before Christmas, then making extensive preparations for the feast itself. It's the busiest month, commercially, that you've seen. Marjorie's basket empties faster. The accounts grow. The credit book fills with new entries, new debts, new promises. You develop your own round now, not separate from Marjorie's. You're still working together, still splitting the catch, still consulting on prices and credit. But you have households that respond to you specifically, where you've built your own version of the relationship. The cook at a solicitor's house near Fenchurch, who was initially suspicious of you and is now reliably there at the window when you call. The pie woman on Cheapside who buys in bulk and has started using your judgment on quality rather than her own. Small things, early things, the first chapters of a book that isn't started yet. You're ready for credit decisions, Marjorie says one evening looking at the accounts book. It's December, a week before Christmas, and you've been at the dock for 2.5 months. Am I? 2 of your accounts are going to ask before the new year. I want you to make the call yourself. She doesn't look up from the book. I'll tell you what I'd do after, but you make the call first. This is the clearest thing she said about your progress. It lands differently than you expected. Not like an achievement, but like a new weight. The next basket, the one with a few more pounds in it. Which accounts? She shows you. You think about the cook at the solicitor's house. The slight hesitation recently when you arrived, the way the transaction took longer than usual, the look she had when she closed the door. She's going to ask for 30 days, you say. Marjorie looks at you. She is, she says. And You think about 11 years of consistent payments, about what Marjorie said about reputation as collateral, about the specific small signs you've been noting for 2 weeks without quite knowing you were noting them. I extend, with a note in the book, and I watch for the 40-day point. Marjorie closes the book. Good, she says. Let me tell you what happens over the years, in the way that years compress when you try to talk about them. Not less true for being summarised, just different. The Fishmongers' Company Court takes 7 months to make a ruling on the quality standards document that Marjorie and the 6 women submitted. The ruling, when it comes, is not exactly a victory. It's more of an inconclusive draw, a formal acknowledgement that the street traders' voluntary standards are consistent with the company's requirements, which doesn't grant them membership or protection, but makes the argument for suppression substantially harder to make. Edmund Croft doesn't come back to the dock. Someone else from the company comes, eventually, to discuss licensing again, and Marjorie has the same conversation with them that she had with Croft, perhaps slightly more efficiently. Catherine Webb, watching this from the edge, finally signs the standards document. 7 of 7. The Fishmongers' Company, over the following decades, will intermittently try various approaches to controlling the fishwives, and intermittently find the same wall. The women are too numerous, too necessary, too well organised in their informal way, too skilled at using the specific gaps in the law. They will not be formalised on someone else's terms. They will not accept oversight from a body they didn't choose. Some of them will be licensed eventually. The trade will evolve, the city will grow, the lines will blur. But the institution of the fishwife, the woman carrying the basket and calling the street and extending the credit and maintaining the round, will persist through the Tudor period and the Stuart period and beyond. Will persist in some form until the 19th century, when the railway changes everything and Billingsgate becomes something different. Right now, it is this: what you're living, what you're part of. Marjorie Cole runs her empire from a battered leather book and a patch of dock, and the relationship she's maintained through 23 years of not once failing to show up before dawn. She trains you the way her mother trained her, not by teaching you rules, but by teaching you specific things. Which way to stack a basket, how to read a hesitation, when to extend credit and when to cut it off, how to carry 40 pounds on your head without losing your balance. The balance matters more than it seems. It always matters more than it seems. Christmas morning. You're not at the dock. The market is closed, genuinely closed. The dock empty and the boats tied up and the bells of St. Mary at Hill ringing, not the working bells, but the festive ones. A different pattern, more sustained, resonating through the cold morning air like something trying to say more than bells can usually say. You're at the church on Lower Thames Street with Marjorie and Ellen and Joan, and the new girl whose name is Margaret and who is doing better than you were at her stage, but is still jumping at noises, still slightly lost, still writing everything down in a small book she carries in her apron pocket. You notice her writing things down, and you remember doing the same thing in your first week, before the information moved from words on paper to the body itself. After the service there is food, a genuine Christmas dinner at the house on Thames Street, paid for from the fund. Marjorie and Mrs. Ellen Sharp, having spent yesterday afternoon cooking in a collaboration of barely suppressed disagreement about methods that ended in something that smells like roasted pork and something that looks like a pudding and something else that involves a lot of pastry and seems to be going well. Joan has brought ale from the tavern on the corner, a small barrel, enough for everyone. More than enough, given how tired everyone is. You sit at the table that takes up most of the back room, 7 women of various ages, in various stages of the trade, eating pork and pudding and something in pastry and drinking ale that is not watered because Ellen said that Christmas ale should not be watered, a position Joan supported with some enthusiasm. Margaret, the new girl, looks around the table with the expression you probably had in your second week, the one where you're still trying to work out what all this is, how these relationships work, where you fit. You know what she's thinking, or you know what you were thinking. You pass her the bread. "How long does it take?" she asks you quietly, while Marjorie is in conversation with Ellen about the quality of a particular mackerel seller's catch. Before what? Before it stops being terrifying. You think about this. You think about the first morning on the dock, the darkness and the smell and the weight of the basket and the certainty that you are going to fail at this and be sent back to Norwich in disgrace. You think about the flood in October, the cold water over your ankles and the crate that needed saving and your hands shaking at the top of the steps. 3 months, you say. More or less. She looks at you. That long? Then it starts feeling like home. You pause. The terrifying part doesn't go away completely. It just stops being in charge. She considers this. Does it get easier? You think about Marjorie's hands, Ellen's hearing, Joan's feet, the accumulated physical cost of decades of this work. The carrying gets easier, you say. The business gets easier. The cold. You look at your cracked hands. Not really. She almost smiles. Across the table, Marjorie is watching you with that look. The one she had when you caught the tip-in basket. The one she had when you made the right call about the credit extension. She says nothing. Raises her cup. You raise yours. Winter ends. Not immediately. This is England in the 16th century. And winter doesn't so much end as gradually become less certain about its position. But by March, the Thames is running fast and clear and cold, the spring tide bringing something that smells like the sea rather than the residue of a city, and the mornings are still dark at 4, but not black dark, a different quality of dark. The sky starting to have ideas about eventually becoming light. The herring round extends. You're covering more ground now, adding 2 new households to your section of the route, negotiating them yourself, setting the credit terms, making the calls. Marjorie has a new girl, Anne's daughter, 15, arriving from Southwark with no experience and a lot of willingness, which Marjorie says is the correct combination. You watch Marjorie begin with her the same way she began with you. The empty basket practice, the posture correction, the specific facts delivered in specific contexts, which way to stack a basket, how to read a hesitation, when to extend credit and when to cut it off. You watch this, and you're aware of being on the other side of it now. Not yet Marjorie. Nowhere close to Marjorie. But something different from the girl who arrived in September with 20 shillings and a letter of introduction. Something in between. You should start your own book, Marjorie says in April. Different from mine, your accounts, your relationships, your notes. I've been keeping mental notes. Mental notes are for things you won't need in 10 years. The book is for things you will. She pauses. You'll need to decide on your handwriting. Mine's a disgrace. Don't let yours get like that. You buy a small book from the stationers on Cheapside, dark cover, good paper, the kind that will last. You write your first entry, Agnes Hartley, Thames Street, London, April 1573. And then, because it's true, learned from Monsieur Cole, have not thanked her properly. You show this to her. She reads it again. That's not how the book works, she says. It's an account book. It's the first page. She's quiet for a moment. Well, she says. All right. She hands it back. May. The evenings are longer now, the light holding past the supper hour, and on a Friday in mid-May you're at the dock after the end of the afternoon round, sitting on the dock steps with your feet not quite touching the water. The tide is coming in, the surface still a foot below you but rising, watching the river. The pool of London at evening is something different from the pool at dawn. The working boats are mostly tied up now, the day's business done, and the light off the water is warm rather than cold. The May sun going down somewhere west of the city in a slow reddening of the sky. The ships at anchor in the pool are catching it. The light touches the highest points of the rigging first, then works its way down, the masts going gold while the hulls are still in shadow. There are maybe 40 ships in the pool tonight. 40 ships that came from everywhere, that will go back to everywhere, that carry everything that this empire of trade requires to keep moving. Some of them have been at sea for months. Some will leave tomorrow. Tom Finch's smack is tied up 3 spaces along. Finch himself is on the deck, doing whatever fishermen do at the end of a day, mending nets probably, or checking the rigging, the maintenance that never ends. He sees you on the steps and nods. You nod back. He's trusted you this year, in the way fishermen trust the women who buy from them consistently and fairly. He started keeping a basket aside for your arrival, the best of the morning catch, because you've earned the right to first refusal by showing up before anyone else and paying the agreed price without renegotiating on quality grounds. This is a form of relationship that doesn't have an official name. It's not a contract. It's not written down anywhere. It's an agreement maintained by repetition, by the reliable reciprocal meeting of expectations, by the fact that both parties benefit from continuing it. The world runs on this. The unofficial world, the one that feeds 60,000 people, before the official world is out of bed. The sun is going down. Behind you, the city is settling into its evening mode. The carts going home, the shops shutting, the taverns opening, the bells marking the hour in their overlapping, slightly out of time way. St. Mary at Hill, St. Magnus the Martyr. All Hallows barking, half a dozen others answering from further away, the sound of them layering over each other like the voices of a crowd that isn't quite making the same argument. Your hands are in your lap, you're looking at them. They're different from the hands you arrived with, broader across the knuckle, darker with sun and weather. The cracks are part of the texture now, permanent lines in the skin that no amount of tallow has fully healed, though they no longer open and bleed. The callus on the right hand, where the basket rim rests when you're carrying, has thickened to a ridge that you no longer notice. These are useful hands. That's something you wouldn't have thought before in Norwich, when your hands were a different kind of useful. Sewing mostly and cleaning, and the light work of a household where the heavy work was done by other people. You didn't think about your hands then. They were just part of you. Now you think about them. Now they're an instrument you maintain and understand the way a fisherman understands his boat. The water is up to the step below your feet. Let me tell you what a fishwife carries. 40 pounds of fish most days. Some days more. Some days in the winter when the catch is good and the demand is high, 50 or 60 pounds, balanced in the broad shallow basket. The basket on the cloth pad on the head, the whole arrangement requiring the neck and spine to become architecture, load-bearing, adjusted moment by muscles that have developed specifically for this purpose. She carries this 10, 12, sometimes 15 miles a day in whatever weather, on roads that range from passably maintained to actively dangerous. She carries it in summer heat that makes the fish turn faster and requires her to sell more quickly and adjust her route accordingly. In winter cold that numbs her hands and makes every step on the ice dock a deliberate decision. In the rain, when the mud is deep and the smell of everything is intensified and the fish in the basket are wetter than they were when she bought them. She carries the weight of the knowledge, which fish are worth buying today and which aren't, which customers will want what, where the credit can be extended and where it can't, what the tides are doing and how they'll affect the boat's timing, what the guild is doing and how to position against it. She carries the memory of everyone who worked this trade before her. Not their names, mostly. Those get lost. But their methods, their routes, their accumulated experience with these docks and these streets and these relationships, passed person to person, morning to morning, through the books they kept and the things they said and the specific demonstrations of how to stack a basket so it doesn't tip. This knowledge is not written in any official record. It doesn't need to be. It's written in the bodies of the women who carry it, in the posture, in the calluses, in the specific, particular way of walking that keeps 40 pounds balanced on a human head through 2 miles of Tudor London streets without spilling a single fish. You know how to do that now. It took 3 months. The room is dark. You can't see the ceiling, but you know it's there. 6 feet above you, sloped at the far end where the roof pitches, low enough that you've knocked your head on it twice in the months you've been living here. You know it by the sounds it makes in the wind and the places where the cold comes through in winter. The house is quiet, not silent. The house on Thames Street is never silent. There's always the river and the settlement of old timber and the breathing of other sleeping people, but quiet in the particular way of a working household after midnight, when the work is done and the next day's work hasn't started yet. Margaret, the new girl, is asleep on her side of the pallet. She's been here 6 weeks and she's stopped jumping at noises and she's found her balance on the dock, and yesterday she negotiated her first sale without prompting from anyone, a small one, a handful of sprats to a kitchen girl. But she counted the money correctly and knew the going price, and the kitchen girl came back this morning for more. You're lying in the dark, not quite asleep. Your body's tired. It's always tired by this time of night. The tiredness that comes from a day that started at 3 in the morning and hasn't properly stopped since. The accumulated cost of miles and weight and cold and the constant low-level engagement that this work requires. But your mind is still moving, thinking about the accounts, about the solicitor's cook who paid her 30-day bill 2 days early. A good sign, things improving. About the new household on the Gracechurch Street extension that you've been cultivating for 3 weeks and that bought from you twice this month without prompting, which means you're close to making them a regular. About the book on the table beside the pallet. Your book, 3 months old now, filling up with your handwriting, which is slightly better than Marjorie's, but not by as much as you'd like. About Marjorie herself, in the room below, asleep or not asleep, doing whatever version of this she does, 23 years of it. Another 20 ahead of her, maybe, if her hands hold and her health holds and the guild stays at bay. And after that, who carries the book? You know the answer, or you're becoming the answer. It's not a decision that's been made, it's something that's happening like the way the tide comes in, not all at once but steadily. the level rising degree by degree until it's somewhere different from where it was. You think about your mother in Norwich, the look on her face when you left. Worry, mostly, with something underneath it that was harder to name. Maybe relief, maybe hope, maybe both at once. The way parents feel when their children go somewhere they themselves could not. You've written her a letter, 2 letters actually. She can't read, but you sent them to your father who can, and he reads them to her. In the letters you described the dock and the river and the market and the work. You described Marjorie. You described, carefully, not in a way that would worry them, the flood. You didn't describe the cold as being as bad as it is, or the way your hands feel in January. Some information doesn't need to cross the 100 miles between here and Norwich by letter. The river sounds different tonight. Quieter, maybe. Low water, the tide well out, the sound of the water at the pilings a slower rhythm than when the flood is running. You know these sounds now. You know the specific language of this city's river, the way it speaks through the timber of the dock and the stone of the wharves and the hulls of the boats. You know what it sounds like when the tide is coming and when it's going, when the river is running fast and when it's slow, when a big flood is building and when it's just a normal day. You know it the way you know your own heartbeat, not because you thought about it, but because you live in a body that lives here. The bells ring 3 o'clock. Street, Marriott Hill closest. Then the others coming in one by one, a chain of sound across the sleeping city marking the hour. Your eyes open, not because of the bells, before the bells, that internal clock again, the one that reset itself in October and has been running ever since. The alarm that doesn't ring but simply changes the quality of sleep, shifts you toward waking with 20 minutes to spare. You lie there for a few more minutes, the last few minutes of warmth, the last minutes before the world requires things of you. Margaret is still breathing slowly beside you. She'll have another hour. Outside, the city is in its deepest night, not the early dark of 11 o'clock when the taverns are still going, not the approaching light of 4 when the market workers begin, but this hour, 3 in the morning, when the night belongs to people who have no choice about being in it, and you. You have a choice. You chose it 6 months ago in Norwich, and you keep choosing it every morning when you get up before dawn and walk to the dock. It's not the same choice it was at the beginning. Then it was abstract, a direction rather than a destination. Now it's specific. This dock, these boats, these accounts, this city, this exact slice of Tudor London's enormous indifferent life. Your choice, your hands, your £40. You get up. The floor is cold. You've learned not to pause on it, to keep moving, to put the clothes on quickly and get your blood moving. Wool dress, apron, coif, boots, mittens into the pocket of the apron for later. When the cold gets into your fingers at the dock, you move through the dark room with the confidence of someone who knows this space. No candle. You've learned to navigate by texture and memory, the geography of the room in your feet rather than your eyes. The staircase. 3rd step wider. 6th step dips left. Gap at the bottom. You step over the gap. Into the hall. Through the hall. The front door. Cold air. River air. The specific smell of pre-dawn London, which is not the same as any of our smell. Not the daytime city smell of cooking and animals and commerce. Not the night smell of coal smoke and tavern spill. This is the city at rest, or as close to rest as it gets, breathing slowly, the smell of it quieter. The river underneath everything else, present and constant. You turn left. You walk. The streets are empty except for the people who are always in them at this hour. The night watchmen on their rounds, the last of the tavern goers going home, the occasional cart making an early start, a woman sitting in a doorway who might be sleeping and might not be. You pass her, you note her, you keep walking. Because the fish won't wait for the bells. Because the good catch goes to the women who arrive first. Because somewhere at the end of this dark walk the dock is waking up, the boats are coming in on the tide, and the market that feeds this city is getting ready to do what it does every morning before the city is awake to watch it. The dock behind you. Billingsgate in the dark, the lanterns swinging, the voices beginning. You're standing at the edge of the dock looking at the river, waiting for Marjorie to finish her assessment of the first boat in. The water is black and fast in the dark, moving, always moving. The Thames doesn't stop, not when you're asleep, not when the market closes, not when the winter freezes the air solid and the boats can't run. Even then, under the ice on the edges, the river runs. It always runs. 400 years the bridge has been here. The river before that for longer than anyone's memory reaches. The city that grew up along its banks because the river was there first. Because the river made trade possible. Because the river is the reason all of this. The ships and the commerce and the fish and the markets and the 60,000 people and the church towers and the guild halls and the women with their baskets in the dark is here at all. You learn a city from the inside, from the ground level, from the weight of a basket on your head at 5 a.m, and the cracked skin on your hands and the specific sound the dock makes at low tide. You learn it the way Marjorie learned it, and her mother before her. Not in books, not in records, in the body. And the body remembers. Centuries from now, this dock will be different. Billingsgate will move eventually, be rebuilt, modernized, and eventually relocated, and eventually the building they move it to will become a different kind of thing entirely. No longer a fish market at all. The river will be different, tamed, the salmon gone, the sturgeon gone, the massive tidal swings dampened by embankments, the smell, that specific, layered, overwhelming smell of the pre-modern Thames, gone, replaced by something cleaner, better in most ways but different. The city will spread to cover everything you can see from London Bridge and far beyond it. The buildings will grow taller. The streets will be paved, lit, mapped, named with signs. The work of navigating London will become possible without the library that Marjorie carries in her head. People will still live here, will still work here, will still wake before dawn and go to places where things are sold and bought and argued over. We'll still calculate prices and extend credit and maintain relationships that aren't written down anywhere official. We'll still carry things. Some of the weight will be different. Some will be the same. The human body doesn't change much. The way tired feels, the way cold gets into cracked skin, the way 40 pounds distributes itself across a neck and spine and requests that you become, for the duration of the carrying, something solid and aligned and capable. The balance. That's what you have now. That's what the 6 months have given you. Not just the balance of the basket on the head. That's there too in the muscles and the posture, but the other kind. The balance between what you can carry and what you can't. Between the credit you extend and the credit you can afford. Between the city's demands and your own requirements for rest and warmth and food and occasional Sunday mornings on London Bridge watching the river go by. You're learning to be a person in this place. That's slow work. That's the work that takes longer than 3 months. Longer than 6 months. Longer than Marjorie's 23 years, if she's honest. You're at the beginning of it. Which is fine. You're 17 years old, and you know which way the tide is running and which fish are worth buying today and how to read whether a household is having a bad month and how to carry £40 through 2 miles of Tudor London without spilling a single herring. That's not nothing. That's, in fact, quite a lot. The lantern on the dock is swinging in the river wind. The water beneath it is black, moving, ancient. The first boat of the morning is coming in on the tide, and you're here, before the bells, before the light, before the city knows it needs you, already here. Let the dock go dark behind you. Let the baskets come to rest. Let the cold ease off, just for now, just for this moment. Let the sound of the river stay. The river stays. The river is always there. You're warm enough, tired enough, done enough for today. Your hands can rest. The tide will come in again. The fish will come in again. The morning will come. But that's tomorrow. Right now, the dark. Right now, the quiet. Right now, the sound of the city settling. The sound of water. Centuries of water. Let it slow you down. Let it pull you under. The way the tide moves without trying, without effort, without question. Just movement, just water, just rest. You've earned it. Take it. Good night.